Hi, I'm Gene Preuss. Welcome to Public Affairs Public Access at Houston Media Source. I'm Gene Preuss with the League of Women Voters, and it's time for our Thursday evening, once a month, public access show. And I've got a great lineup today, I think. I'm very happy that all of you accepted the invitation, could come. We're going to talk about three big topics. It is June, and the League of Women Voters, we just had our annual meeting. And we had our repast a couple of weeks ago, and it's a big time for us. June is an important time of the month for several reasons. One is that in Texas, it's the 100th anniversary of Texas ratifying the 19th Amendment. And the 19th Amendment, of course, gave women the right to vote. And we'll be talking with one of our guests who will be joining us from Austin via Skype. And that is Susan Floyd from the Texas State Library and Archives. They have a new exhibit coming up, and we'll be talking about that here in just a second. But joining me in studio is Maggie Nunez, who is with Out for Education. She'll be talking about another one of the big topics for June, and which is Pride Month. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be talking about that. And to my left, we have Richard Selvera from the University of Houston downtown, which we're all quite familiar with. I won't say how. And he is the director of Veterens Services. May was the time that because of Memorial Day, we tend to remember our veterans. But also today is a very special day because it's the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And that was when the Allies in World War II launched the large offensive against the Nazi-occupied France, and began the eventual downfall of the Third Reich and all that went with it. And so joining us will also be, besides Richard, talking about veterans and veterans issues, Alexander Belikowski, a professor of history at the University of Houston downtown too. So I've got to tell you guys, and I'm very serious. I'm very happy that you said yes, because I've been out of town for 10 days, and I had some other, some things lined up. They all fell through, and I was in Montana, no cell phone, no service. And so I contacted you guys at the last minute, and you said yes, and so thank you so much.
No stress.
Thank you so much. One of the issues, and we'll first go on to talk to Susan Floyd, the Texas State Library and Archives. Susan, how are you this evening?
Hi, good evening from Austin.
What up?
What's the weather like over there?
It's been raining off and on. I think it's cleared off a little now, and we're expecting it to be 100 degrees within 24 hours, I think.
Well, we're already there. And we had, I guess, 4 or 5 inches of rain yesterday, too. So you're sending it our way. We appreciate the rain, but we don't need that much. But I asked you on because you have an exhibit coming up at the Texas State Library and Archives. Now, a lot of people may not know that we even have a Texas State Library and Archives. Tell us a little bit about what the library is and what it does.
Well, our collections actually go back to the Spanish colonial period, but Texas has had some form of a state library and archive since the period of the Republic. And for a long time, a lot of our collections were housed in the basement of the Capitol or in other locations around Austin, including at one point in an Army Quonset hut. In 1909, we were officially formed as an agency, so this year is our 110th anniversary as the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. And we're putting together a special exhibit to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment for women's suffrage. And our exhibit mostly focuses on the Texas women's role and what was going on here at the state level, because our collections at the Texas State Archives focus primarily on Texas government records, along with some personal papers, manuscript collections, and many millions of photographs in our photographs collections. So we've drawn from those to put this exhibit together in our lobby in Austin. We're open every day, 5 days a week, and the second Saturday of every month. So we're open this coming Saturday. If anybody plans to be in Austin or wants to come visit, we're open from 9 to 4 every Saturday. And we have 3 reading rooms, reference library, where you can find out about any topics. It's a regular public library with full service as a starting point for your research. And we hold all federal and state publications. We're a depository library, as well as all of the titles published by Texas State University presses. So there's a lot happening there. And then upstairs, we have the Texas Family Research Center, where you can begin your genealogy research. You can do research on any state, but we focus on Texas and our materials there. And then over on the other side of our reading room, we also have the Texas State Archives Reading Room, which is for people who want to come in and do research on our original materials.
So I guess in a nutshell, there's a lot there to see. And I think that it's interesting because I do think that there are a lot of people who don't know about it. You're right next to the Capitol. In fact,
Yes.
every other March when legislature is in session, we send from the university a bunch of people, students, staff, and faculty, to go and visit with the legislators, and because our funding is always up, and so we talk to our legislators, and we park the buses for tour groups, and everybody going to the Capitol is right in front of the Lorenzo de Zavala archive.
That's right.
So it's a beautiful, beautiful building, and very friendly and helpful people. And so I think that it's a great opportunity to visit. Is there a charge?
No, it's all free. We have a fundraising group who may occasionally put on events, but all of our events and any research you do certainly is free. The parking, however, is not free. You can park in the Capitol Visitors Garage for up to 2 hours. So keep that in mind if you come down on a weekday or on the weekend. During the legislative session, it's much more difficult to get parking. But now that the legislative session is over, it should be easier to visit us. Mm-hmm. And we can also provide more information about that if you call or email or check out our website, which is tsl.texas.gov.
Okay. So tell us about Women's Power Women's Vote. That's coming up on June the 17th. And tell us a little bit about that.
So we've put this exhibit together to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote in the United States. Many different institutions, museums, libraries, archives around the country and in Washington, D.C., a lot of the national institutions are doing exhibits about this, including, I'm sure, some in Houston, several other institutions here in Austin that have exhibit spaces. And we're opening ours up about a week before the anniversary of Texas ratification. So each state, of course, had to ratify the 19th Amendment. Texas was the 9th state out of the necessary 36 states to ratify the amendment. And that happened on June the 28th, 1919. So that anniversary is coming up in a couple of weeks. So we're opening our exhibit to coincide with that. And then celebrating this throughout 1919 into 1920. The thing was finally finished in August of 1920 when Tennessee ratified. So our exhibit is actually going to be up into 2020 in our lobby. So if you don't get a chance to come next week for our opening, it will still be up. If you come to Austin, come and take a look at it. Basically, it is items from our collections, from our holdings at the state archives and in the state library collections, showing the story of women's suffrage from Texas history perspective, focusing on Texas women organizing, the different groups that were involved, and a lot of the complex issues that were involved from the late 19th century through the women's suffrage movement into the early days of women voting, and then continuing through really the present, but focusing on the mid 20th century when we had more women getting elected to office here in Texas and being appointed to statewide office. So we have a lot of photographs and other information about the International Year of Women and the International Decade of Women, which was from 1976 to 1986. And as you may know, the International Women's Year Conference happened in Houston. So we have some materials from the coordinating committee, and some of those will be on display. One of the speakers at our opening event next Tuesday is actually Dr. Nikki Van Hightower, who was formerly the women's advocate for the city of Houston, among many other titles. So we're excited to have a Houstonian coming to speak on our panel. We're also featuring Dr. Nancy Baker-Jones, who will be moderating the panel. And she's the president of the Ruth Weingarten Foundation for Texas Women's History. And joining them as well, who I'm sure you know, and you can help me pronounce her name correctly, Grace Chimene, the president of the League of Women's Voters of Texas. I believe that's her name. I haven't actually spoken to her in person yet. So that's going to round out our panel, and they will be answering a few questions developed by our exhibit committee in the process of putting the exhibit together, really focusing on the role that Texas women have played in not only the suffrage movement, but the continuing movement for ballot access and having more women represented in elective office. And then we'll have a Q&A session. So the people who attend will be able to ask some of these very experienced and knowledgeable experts more. You'll get to see the exhibit. We're going to have our archives reading room closed to the public during the exhibit, but open to attendees who will be able to see some special collection materials that are not in the exhibit, because we have 7 exhibit cases in our lobby and many, many more materials that could possibly fit into the exhibit space we have. So for this special event, we're going to have several of those items out on display and some of our archivists and librarians on hand to show those items and answer questions from the public. There will also be some refreshments. We're going to have sandwiches, tea, lamb's candies. Very excited about that. Also a few behind the scenes sneak peeks around the librarian archives. Most of the staff will be there. This is happening during the day on Tuesday, June the 18th from 3 to 5 p.m. So our whole staff will be there. So we're going to have a lot of people who are excited to answer any other questions that folks may have about visiting us, doing research. It'll be a really great jumping off point, especially for anyone who's new to our facility.
Well, that sounds fascinating. I think Archie has a question for you.
I do. Do you have a personal favorite section in the piece in the exhibit? Say like the genealogy research area, or the like a specific picture that comes with a story or a manuscript?
Oh, we've looked at so many things over the past few weeks. We just started installing it this week, and I'm trying to think. It's difficult to pick out one thing. There's so many amazing items there. I think some of the artifacts that are in the exhibit are really special. We also have an artifacts collection with many hundreds of items. If you look at our finding aids online, which is the archivist term for inventories of archival collections, a lot of those are online, and you can see what types of files and manuscript items and photographs we have. But we also have an archives database, and a few of the items from that are making it into the exhibit, including an old stenography machine that a court reporter would have used in the late 19th century. And that's in our case that's talking about women's impact in the workforce from the 19th century up through the present, really. But we really focus on the first women entering the workforce in larger numbers in the 19th and early 20th century, and then the influx of women during and after World War II, and then into the 1970s and 1980s. So seeing an artifact like that and knowing it's something that someone actually used and it has come down to us, so you can actually see it there. It's 3-dimensional. You can picture it in use. Really brings the story to life, I think.
It's absolutely fantastic.
I think it's interesting to know, or maybe sobering to know, is that for a long time, women didn't have the same opportunities, didn't have the same doors that were opening as men did, and we tend to think that that's ancient history. Oh, that's back 100 years ago, and it's really a long time ago. But when I was born, my mother, as a married woman, didn't have the right to sign for her own property or write a check with her name. And for a long time, as a historian, you go back and you look at the records. A lot of times, it's impossible to know what a woman's name was because her name was Mrs. Tom Smith. She'd sign it Mrs. Tom Smith. It's like, unless you knew who Tom Smith married, she didn't have an identity. And so, for a lot of people, that's, way in the past, but in my own time, it was happening. And I mean, Richard, you're going to talk about veteran services. What about women in the military? There have been women in the military for a long time, but
Oh, sure.
But
they face a lot of challenges that you probably would have trouble imagining. Just the barriers they face just because of their gender is really, probably up until this day, I'm sure women, I'm not a woman, I can't really speak firsthand, but my experience has been they face a lot of challenges even up until when I got out in 2017.
Right.
They were, they faced a lot of challenges, yeah.
What do you think, Maggie?
Well, you were saying that women have faced all these obstacles, and I feel like when you add several other identities as well, it just piles up. So not only being a woman, but then a woman of color, and then we had sexual orientation or gender identity. What if you were a trans woman in the military? It's just so many more loopholes in order for you to achieve that goal or achieve the same status than perhaps a white male could easily achieve.
Well, and you're looking at, we're talking about this exhibit on women's history. For one of the common things that if you read what people were saying about women who wanted to vote 100 years ago, question their gender and question their identity and question who they were, and this was a big insult back in those days. That women who were trying to get in the military and serve, or who were even trying to vote, they were questioned and they were not seen as being real women. And so it's a very important story, and I'm glad that the Texas State Library is doing it. And thank you. Is there any one thing that what is the most important takeaway that people are going to get from the exhibit?
I think that this has been a long struggle. We have documents going back to the mid-19th century, speaking to the point you were making of women suing for the right to divorce and the right to get property from their divorce, including women who were related to the vice president of the Republic of Texas, Lorenzo de Zavala. We have some of those records all the way up into the present. This is still very relevant. And one of the points that the documents show, that the historical record shows, is that this has never been a perfect narrative. Just as you were saying on the panel, and we talked about this on our social media today, which is at TSLAC, TSLAC, if you want to follow up on all platforms. Some of the documents that we showed today from the exhibit are arguments that both suffragists and anti-suffragists were making 100 years ago about the impact women's suffrage would have on white dominance of the electorate. People were making arguments that, well, if you let women vote, are we going to let black women vote? If black women are allowed to vote, that will change the makeup of the outcome of elections. And there were arguments going on both sides for that. And we don't have as much archival documents about that for a variety of reasons, which would be a whole other show, because we have mostly government records. And most of the manuscript collections that we have in our holdings are from prominent white suffrage organizers. Some of those were also anti-lynching campaigners, so we have some interesting records that touch on some of these topics. But we have many records that are pretty explicit about some of the racial and racist arguments that were happening at the time. So we tried to tell the full story. So I think it's important to realize that while this is a commemoration and therefore a celebration, because the 19th Amendment is a monumental step in women's equality in America, it is also an ongoing struggle, and the work is never complete. And I'm sure that some of the women coming to speak on our panel who have been involved in activism will also make that point, and we're really looking forward to hearing from them about their work from the 1960s to the present, about how they've organized and the challenges they've faced, not just at the ballot box, but in the workplace and elsewhere.
One other question for you. What about going back even further? I know we're looking at the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, but if we go back even further, what about women in the Texas Revolution? There were some very strong, some very important women during the Revolutionary period, but oftentimes they're missing from the historical narrative. So do you have much on women from that period?
We do. I don't have any names of collections off the top of my head, but if you look at our website and email me, I can point you in the direction of the resources we have or other resources and other repositories as well. But I would like to point out one of the things that is in this exhibit is a thimble that belonged to Joanna Troutman, who sewed what is by some considered to be the first Lone Star flag. It was one of the first flags that had the single star on it. And I believe she was only 17 years old when she made the flag. She sewed it by hand, and it was actually carried in the Texas Revolution. And that thimble will be on display in the exhibit.
Wow. So, well, I look forward to seeing that. I'm going to try to make a special trip up there, and I'd like to be there for the opening. So Susan Floyd from the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, thank you so much, and that was a great amount of information and pitch for the exhibit Texas Power, Women's Power, Women's Vote. I just can't remember.
I like Texas Power, Texas Women.
It was great until I messed it up. So sorry about that.
Women's Power, Women's Vote, June the 17th.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're here, and if you'd like to join in the conversation and correct me whenever I make mistakes like that, you can call us in at 713-807-1794. That's 713-807-1794. One of the other guests that we have here in studio is Maggie Nunez. Maggie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Maggie, like you stated. I'm a current grad school student at the University of Houston Clear Lake. I'm pursuing a master's in industrial organizational psychology. My undergrad was at the University of Houston downtown, and I've done activism since I started at UHC. Definitely have been involved in in city organizing, in state fighting for state rights. Fighting for LGBTQ rights in the state level as well as nationally as well.
Well, one of the things about June is Pride Month, and it is a month, and we have Pride Month because in the 60s there was a uprising, sometimes called the Stonewall Uprising, but it was a reaction to police harassment and brutality of LGBTQ community in New York, and at the Stonewall nightclub, restaurant, bar, and people had enough. They revolted, and so every year now we celebrate that. So tell us a little bit about what you know about that, and what it means to you. What does Pride Month mean to you?
Well, honestly, June is one of my favorite months because of Pride. I've been able to attend Pride the last 5 years, and I've seen even then within the 5-year span, I've seen it evolved. I mean, when I started going, it was in Montrose. In the Montrose street, so it would take the whole street. People could bring their chairs, and it was such a community uplifting moment. Now I got moved to downtown. We're all I feel like we're stuck in a little square because it's in Houston's town hall, city hall. But nevertheless, the concept is still there to really uplift queer folks and have a day made for us in which we don't have to fear holding our partner's hand, where we don't have to fear for really expressing our gender identity. We're just free to be ourselves without any repercussions from maybe some homophobic individuals. But I always look forward to Pride. It's so much fun. It's always hot, extremely hot. So if you go, make sure to bring sunscreen, lots of water, free clothes, not tight clothes. But I think the most important thing about Pride is the support that we have for one another. And it's a very life-changing experience that I encourage everybody to attend at some point. It's just very, like I said, very uplifting, in which Houston is known for bringing artists. If I'm correct, I don't know if Lizzo might be performing this year, so is Young M.A. Yeah. Last year it was Todrick Hall. I saw Estelle a couple years back. They bring a lot of celebrity drag queens, and we prepare for Pride. So there's a lot of other events happening surrounding this month, which is just amazing.
This is maybe just a sign of age, but I had no idea who the musicians, but Archie did. So, yeah.
Lizzo's great.
So,
Young M.A.
Young M.A. is dope too.
As a young person in the LGBTQ community, it seems to me as a grown adult and, somebody who's been around for a while, that it probably is easier now for young people to come out, to accept their identity and to proclaim it. And like you were saying, hold hands with your loved one, without fear of repercussion. Is that just a misperception on my part?
So, like mentioned before, I think that there's lots of resources out there for when it comes to like going through the realization of what your sexuality is, what your gender identity is. We did have a conversation about this, about representation in the media, right? I feel like we're in an era where we're getting that peak. We're entering the doors, I guess, of like more representation of queer folks, of people of color. But I don't know if it's necessarily easier. I feel like every coming out story, it takes lots of self-reflection, growth, and risk-taking to be out and proud and say, I'm queer, I'm gay, I'm bi, especially if you're trans, especially if you're a trans woman. That's a whole nother layer of like marginalization that you will face. So I think that we're in an era that this representation is key for like young adults and even kids to realize this might be who I am. I'm seeing myself in the TV, or I'm seeing myself in this magazine, or I'm seeing myself in social media. But I will give you that during Pride Month, I've never seen so much, not just enthusiasm, but like lots of ads and lots of campaigns surrounding this month. And we mentioned that like you can go to Target right now and you can see a whole Pride section that was not seen maybe 10 years ago, especially 20 years ago. So we're being more visible. We're claiming what's ours.
Archie.
Good question. Do you ever encounter, or you feel that you ever encounter false or insincere representations of Pride or LGBTQ, the population in the media? Like, I've seen a lot of memes about that recently because it's...
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's Pride Month and there's just a lot of memes on Instagram.
So like, give an example.
Well, I can't really give an example. I've seen that SpongeBob meme where, do you know the SpongeBob movie?
Yeah.
And the scene where Mr. Krabs is being interviewed by the news, and instead of the actual dialogue in the movie, they say, "So what made you put all these LGBTQ signs and all these decorations up?" And he just goes, "Money," and stuff like that.
Yeah. So
you ever see that?
in addition to this, capitalism enters the venue. And I see what you're saying. I feel that sometimes they do take our queer like social media influencers, and this is a moment where they're trying to cash in and be like, if you want to support queer individuals, support like this organization or just support these products. So I understand where you're coming from. I saw a lot of arguments claiming that like organizations, instead of like trying to feed us all this Pride merch, should donate to queer organizations, to the homeless youth, the homeless queer youth. So, I mean, capitalism does, we live in a capitalist society, so I see how it merges with Pride. And even then, like Houston's Pride got moved from whereas our neighborhood to downtown, which is more locally known for their businesses. Yeah. And when you go to Pride, you see every other organization walk into the parade. You see so many orgs like T-Mobile and just all these well-known companies. But at the end of the day, it's like, what do you do for our communities? Are you just here to walk the parade, or will you stand up for us when we need it to be?
Well, but some of these organizations, and so I'm going to tie this into another question, but some of these organizations, they're supporting their employees, right?
Yes.
They've got and it's so we always have this kind of this moral question. So there's been times in the past that certain groups, certain organizations, certain businesses have been threatened with boycott because somebody in the leadership of that organization makes a comment that's derogatory or seen as derogatory, and so they say, well, we should boycott this organization. And this is not just for LGBTQ issues, for a lot of other things, right?
Wasn't it Papa John's, or it was?
Well, I'm not gonna. I don't want to go there, but I don't want to call anybody out. But the question is that okay? So we say, well, let's boycott this person. However, the thing is that a lot of employees who may not hold those same values and beliefs, if you if you stop going to these places to eat or to do business, then you're also hurting them because
They can't make a living.
Because how are they going to make a living? Because they're the ones who are going to get fired.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's
Sticky situation.
it is. It really is. So how do you make that determination? How do you come down, make these moral questions on the side of what should I do to be supportive?
It's a very interesting question. It's like I've seen these incidents in which, well, someone in the leadership position says a derogatory term, and immediately the response is like, "You're canceled." You know, that's the very thing. Like, you're canceled, and it takes a lot of like, I guess not reflection, but like analyzing of the organization itself. Does it have any previous incidents? Is this the first time? Or is it being reflected upon other individuals? And also taking consideration, like the employee itself. If you're, like, I'm queer, and if that's a big, like, part of my identity, right? That I am LGBTQ+, I am a woman of color, and at the end of the day, I am a woman. But I have to take my identities in consideration when it comes to applying for jobs. So do I want to be in an organization where someone in the leadership position does not accept who I am? Or do I try to make the difference within the organization? So it's a lot of give and take. But I've made it very clear that like I would prefer an organization that will back me up and really tries to be inclusive in the work setting. I hope that helps.
Well, I think that's a great answer. I mean, you know, it's one of these questions you can't always have the answer, right? You have to weigh a lot. And I appreciate that you said that. Richard, you know, we're talking about veterans in the military here too as part of this discussion. Do you see because you're dealing with students who are coming back into college, continuing their education, coming out of the military, and you know, although we talk about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and these other you know initiatives and doors that have closed and sometimes they've opened in the past. What do you see? What kind of issues do you see that people who are coming in the military have, or coming out of the military have?
Well, when I first got in, it was a completely different Army, and the Army, for all of its you know negative portrayals about you know discriminating against people of color and people LGBT community, but I think holistically they offer probably the most opportunities for any minority group of any kind, because it's an organization that values performance. So at the end of the day, if you can, you know, execute the mission, you're going to get recognized, and you're going to have opportunities that, you know, that weren't available to you in the, you know, United States as a whole. You know, I mean, there are some segments of the military that are probably that's less likely to happen. But from my experience, there were people that, you know, would have been discriminated against in the, you know, in the community, or in, you know, in the community I grew up in anyway. But then when they were in the military, they, you know, they had the ability to be leaders. They were smart. You know, they were able to perform their jobs, so they were given opportunities. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why a lot of military members are so proud of their service. It's not, well, they were part of something bigger than themselves, but you know, people are, you know, rewarded for performance.
Yeah.
Rather than
at
the end of the day. Yeah, we have a saying in the military, you know, everybody's green, you know, and in the Army anyway. And from my experience, it was, you know, whether you were LGBTQ, whether you were black, brown, yellow, whatever your color was, you were, you know, if you could do the job, you were promoted. Yeah.
We're going to talk about military here in just a minute, and I've got Dr. Alexander Bielakowski on the phone, and we're going to bring him to talk about D-Day. But I have one other question for you, Maggie. You mentioned at the beginning that you're with Out for Education. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization?
So Out for Education is an incredible nonprofit that provides scholarships to LGBTQ individuals. So their whole mission is trying to invest in queer folks. So I'm here to represent them. I've been one of the recipients, and my scholarship got extended. So
Congratulations.
thank you. So if you could just follow them, it's out_for_education on Instagram, and it's just an
Number 4 or FOR?
No, it's FOR.
FOR. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
and it's just an incredible organization. I really stand for what they stand for, and it's not just like walking the walk, but actually investing in the next generation of queer folks.
Well, very good. And it is a good organization. I know we've had some dealings with them, and the people are wonderful. They're really concerned about young people. I think one of the most moving things is in order to get this scholarship, you have to tell about your life and your story, and why education is important to you, but also about your experience. And to hear some, this is why I was asking you at the beginning: is it easier? And for some kids, it's not. They still face a significant amount of challenges, and you think, but it's 2019, but those prejudices and even biases, even if it's not as overt, still creep in and it's still tough. On the phone with us right now is Dr. Alexander Bielakowski, one of my colleagues at the University of Houston downtown, and actually one of our colleagues. Alex teaches military history. Alex, are you there?
Yes, hi. Gene, are you there?
I am. How are you?
Okay. I'm doing quite well, Gene. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person.
Well, that's okay. We understand. It's it's summer and faculty are often doing things. You may be teaching, but that doesn't mean you want to come in here and spend an hour with me. I can't imagine why not on your Thursday evening. And so we want to celebrate and honor and commemorate another very important part of this month, and that is today is the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And so, Alex, I was wondering if you could tell us, what is D-Day? I mean, I'm sure there's some people who I see it on TV, but who want to know, who may not have that broad of an understanding. It was 75 years ago.
Yeah, D-Day was an event that took place on the 6th of June, 1944, and it was the Allied invasion of France. So we had been at war. We, the United States, had been at war already for about 2.5 years at that point, having gotten into the war in December 41. And the British, of course, and the Free French forces had been involved since September of 1939 when Poland was invaded. And so the Normandy invasion, or D-Day, as it's known, is the effort to finally recapture the European continent from German occupation. So that's kind of quick, simple way of describing what it is basically. So,
let me put you on the spot. How many Americans died?
The death totals from, and see, this is one of the kind of confusing things, and you know this, Gene, as a historian, is that whenever you try and get an exact number of anything, you're always faced with different sources giving you different numbers. Also, one of the problems with trying to find an exact number is that, do you mean D-Day like literally that 12 to 24 hours, or do you mean the kind of D-Day campaign or Normandy campaign? So if you're talking the actual invasion itself, there's about 3,000 or 4,000 Americans, depending on the source again, who die in that initial roughly 24 hours or so. And then there are also Brits and Canadians who are also dying at other beaches. There are 5 beaches: Gold, Juneau, Sword, Utah, and Omaha. And so we go ashore at Omaha, Utah, and that's where the principal American deaths are.
We call that generation the greatest generation, and my father served in World War II. My uncle served in World War II. And, listening to their stories about it, I mean, it's certainly very sobering, and a lot of those kids grew up really fast, but a lot of those kids didn't make it home. And so we really do owe a lot. I mean, I think that we've kind of forgotten what World War II is all about a lot of times, and it's again one of those things in the mythical past. But it was a very significant turning point for United States and world history. Texas was actually represented in there too. There were Texas and Oklahoma units. So it was very important. So I've got Richard here on the in studio with me, and since I have two, and Alex has been on this program before. Actually, I was a guest as well, and we made Alex talk about the space troops, Space Force.
Yeah, the Space Force.
Space Force. But I've got Richard Selvera here with Veterans Services at UHD. And so you've worked with veterans and worked in the military. You've taught in a military college, right?
Yeah, I have, yes.
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 So what are one of the things about World War II is we wanted to give our returning service personnel, men and women, the opportunity to continue their education. Just, as I say, it took a lot of them when they were very young. I know people who signed up when they were 16, which to me sounds unthinkable. How could we let people do that? But the drive to go and defend and serve your country was so great that people and their parents were letting their kids go to war. So and people didn't have 12 years of school. So education for those returning home was very important. The GI Bill of Rights, we like to call it, Servicemen's Readjustment Act. So today, we have in Texas a thing called Hazelwood. And that allows a lot of former service personnel and their families to go to college. But it's not just, and it pays for them, but things aren't always just that easy, are they?
No, absolutely. And I'll just say a little words and then I'll throw it over to Richard. I mean, the GI Bill of Rights was an amazing innovation. It really changed, I would say it fundamentally changed America forever. The percentage of Americans going to college, that we're used to this kind of idea that, almost everyone thinks they have to go to college. That comes from the GI Bill. Prior to World War II, 5%, maybe 10% of Americans have any kind of college-level education. And after the GI Bill, it just becomes this almost customary thing. Oh, you're 18? Okay, well, you're 18, you go to college. And so it really fundamentally changes how we think about education in America. And I'll let Richard say a few words here.
Yeah, thank God we live in the great state of Texas, one of the few states in the country that allow our veterans to go to school, completely tuition-free at a state school, up to 150 credit hours. And as of 9/11, the Texas legislatures allowed that benefit to be passed on to their children. So even your children can go to school up to 150 credit hours. And as long as you served or enlisted in Texas or your home of record is on your DD-214. But 150 credit hours, that's a bachelor's and 30 more hours. So it's really tremendous. And they were really they really take care of our veterans. I think the only other state that I know of is like Illinois that offers that kind of benefit. So
and I'm a native of Illinois. So when you were describing that program, I thought to myself, man, that sounds like Illinois.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, these kind of programs, and another thing to think about is that original GI Bill was much more generous than what the average veteran gets today. Outside of Texas and Illinois, the original GI Bill, any college you could get into, they would pay for. So if you could get into Harvard, the U.S. government paid for a full Harvard education.
Yeah.
So
the GI Bill.
That's important to remember too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The GI Bill now pays full tuition and fees at a state school up to the highest school in Texas, which in Texas it's University of Texas at Austin. So up to that tuition you can get. Plus they give you up to $1,000 a year for books, plus a monthly stipend of depending on your zip code of the school where you go could be $1,700 a month.
Yeah,
that's tremendous. A lot of our veterans they're just going to school and doing well. So veterans, as a result, have a much higher graduation rate. They have a much higher GPA. They progress faster. They just do much better in their college and their studies.
So how can that be tough on them? How what are the why should they have any concerns or problems?
Well, that's a good question. Statistically, I think the number I saw recently was 10% of homeless people are veterans, and only 2% of population are veterans. So it's obviously there's some adjustment issues somewhere.
Well, I saw something on the news, last month when they were talking more about veterans, that something like 40 veterans commit suicide every day. Every day.
Yeah, the number I saw was 22. Well, the number you see in the media a lot is 22.
Okay.
Reoccurring. I don't, either way, it's a huge amount of loss, and it just speaks to the adjustment issues that veterans have when they return. I know when I returned, I was like, you go from what you feel like is, making essentially life and death decisions every day, and having a support network that you've had for, pretty much my whole adult life, going to just basically one day you're in and the next day you're out. And there's this interesting scene in a movie, the movie about the veteran that was disarming bombs in Iraq or something. I forget the name of the movie. Hurt Locker. Exactly. Mm-hmm. There's a scene in there where he's in the grocery store and there's a whole aisle, I'm sure we've all been there, a whole aisle of cereal. And he's just like overwhelmed at the amount of decisions. And it's like you're just, the decisions you're making are different, and you don't have all your friends around you, and your sense of that, that's pretty much your identity while you're in. You're always in uniform. You're always, leading that lifestyle to all of a sudden being kind of just. It's
kind of like
you're your own devices.
Untethered and alone.
Yes, yeah. Yes. So your spouse may or may not know what you're dealing with. So you're I think the mistake a lot of our veterans make is they just try to go alone. And that's, I think it's unfortunate because, especially in the city of Houston, we live in a great community that is more supportive, I would say, arguably, than any other city in the country. We have great organizations like Combined Arms, that is basically like a chamber of commerce, if you will, that's kind of harnessing all the efforts of veteran serving organizations in Houston that makes them accountable to serving our veterans in a timely manner. And I think they have relationships with 150 or so organizations that can address anything from homelessness to food insecurity to joblessness to you just want a venue for making social connections. They can address a whole lot of issues, and for any veteran to be out there trying to struggle alone is I think is unfortunate, because there's so many resources out there.
And if I could interject, and it's important also to know that these problems have always existed. Yeah. This is not, I think people tend to believe that it's only like since Vietnam veterans have problems after wars, and before that never happened. But I think when you look at the history, that these have always been issues. I mean, that's part of the reason the GI Bill was created, was to prevent issues of unemployment and homelessness and things like that after they got back. And another thing is that, unfortunately, in an era before there was respect for kind of mental health issues and support for mental health issues, an awful lot of World War II vets self-medicated. I mean, alcoholism was a real problem among returning World War II veterans because nobody, it was considered, not the thing to do to go talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. It was you be a man up, and so unfortunately, when you kind of look back and we kind of read through some of the memoirs and things like that. I mean, Audie Murphy, who was the most decorated American in World War II, a native Texan, Audie Murphy struggled pretty seriously with alcoholism after World War II. Despite his hero status, despite becoming a movie star, he was still haunted by a lot of demons, and he struggled with that for years.
Yeah, I mean, I was when I graduated high school, I gave myself a high school trip that I paid for and went by myself, and I went to the Pentagon, and there was this painting of this soldier. This is Vietnam era painting. This soldier just staring off, kind of eyes bloodshot. It was called the 1,000-yard stare.
1,000-yard stare.
But that was about all that people thought about, and that it seems like in the 1960s. But previously, as you were saying, World War II, I don't know that there was anything that people said about people who were had what we would call today PTSD, you know, and you were saying that a lot of times veterans don't, their spouses or significant others may not know anything about what they did. Although my father talked to me about his service in World War II, my younger brother said, you know, he never mentioned it.
Yep.
And, you know, he may not have mentioned much to my mom either. So, yeah, that's really interesting. So when did we become aware of this, Alex?
It's really because of the Vietnam War. I mean, the kind of, you know, the whole nation went through trauma, basically, in Vietnam. I mean, obviously the veterans had the worst trauma, but as a nation, we kind of had a kind of collective trauma. And that was the point at which everybody started to say, okay, maybe this isn't normal. Maybe we should be able to talk about the horrible things that went on over there. And it's really Vietnam veterans and their kind of advocates that push these issues and really start to change the whole discussion. And we can start talking about this, and there's nothing wrong with it. And so, you know, I'm glad they have done that, because you know, you mentioned the suicide rate. I mean, I have no idea, you know, what the suicide rate was among World War II vets or anything, but I would be kind of shocked if it wasn't something, you know, comparable.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe even more, because they were a greater percentage of the population.
What is UHD doing? What do you do in your office to help students who are former military and address the needs that they have?
Well, our veterans' needs, I kind of struggle with that, because we have to, all of the needs that we have as in the veteran community are the exact same as we have in any other community. All of our veteran students are students, so they struggle with, you know, food insecurity. You know, if they run short on money, they might be homeless, they might be living at a shelter, you know, living in their car, they might be couch surfing somewhere. So what we try to do in our office is, if we can give them their access to their education benefits, we do that. Give them access to their Hazelwood, we do that. We also provide a community. The U of H downtown is tremendous. Everybody that comes to our school, like visitors from other veteran serving organizations, when they see the space that the leadership at U of H downtown has given us, they are just blown away. I mean, very few other schools really get it, in my opinion, like U of H downtown does. Because we have a one-stop shop where if a veteran is having issues with their college benefits, the rubber meets the road with our coordinators, and they do a lot of the work to get our veterans taken care of. So we provide social opportunities for them. We're going to an Astros game in the fall.
Ooh.
We do a welcome back social. We're going to do that at St. Arnold's, like the first week of school. We also contribute to the health fair that goes on campus in the fall and the spring. We partner with the Houston Food Bank to bring out the mobile food pantry, because there's two trains of thought, I think. Some communities want to bring the veterans together and kind of give them a place of kind of refuge, and I think that does have some value. But then some communities want to, and a lot of the veterans, if you ask them, they're once they're out of the military, they want to be part of, they want to kind of close that chapter in their life, and they want to be part of the U of H downtown or their education community wherever they are. So a lot of veterans, you'll see them wearing their backpack, their camel backpack or whatever, but then some of them you would never even know they were in the military. So I think we have to kind of be mindful of both of those trains of thought. And some of them, if they want space, we kind of let them be students, and if they need us, we're there. And some of them, if they want to kind of come to the Veterans Lounge and tell war stories, then we provide that for them also.
Well, that's nice. I like that inclusiveness, and
Yeah.
and the fact that you didn't just say, "This is what you need. We're gonna do this for you." That you actually ask them, "What do they want?"
Absolutely, because it's hard to you can't just assume. So that's one of the things we did. We did a needs assessment, and we brought in small groups, and we just asked them, "Hey, what do you need? What does it look like for you to be taken care of within our space?" Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Well, Richard, thank you very much. Richard Selvera, Director of Veterans Services at UHD. I want to thank actually all my guests. We're running short on time. Archie, do you have any last question?
I do not. Maggie, do you have any last questions?
Very quick, what do you think is the main reason why veterans end up homeless or end up being part of that homeless population?
Well, I think a lot of it probably ties back to mental health issues, because it was brought up by the panel that we're in a culture that you just kind of soldier on, and you kind of so what do? You don't go to the clinic, you don't take care of yourself, and then when you self-medicate, if you and the VA was getting a bad rap for a while there, which I can't say enough good things, because we live in a community that has a great VA facility. So all of our veterans say great things about it, but they self-medicate, and then that kind of leads us in a spiral. And a lot of communities have that kind of issue, and a lot of, so I think that's my take on it anyway.
Well, thank you. Maggie Nunez, Out for Education, thank you very much for your comments and your help. You've been a real blessing on the show tonight. And I want to thank our people who aren't in studio but have been on the show, and that is my colleague Alexander Blakowski, military history professor at University of Houston downtown, and Susan Floyd with the Texas State Library and Archives. She's still here. Okay, well, wonderful. So thank you so much, and of course, thanks to all of you for joining us and spending an hour with us. I thank Mark Pirtle, our producer, for making this happen, and I'm Gene Preuss with the League of Women Voters of the Houston area. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.